I invite you all to take a moment to pray with me. Holy God, make us aware of your Spirit around us, within us. Help us to move in new ways, be a part of that new creation which you're making. And as always, inspire my words that they might be pleasing and delivered in a coherent way, all to your vision and glory, O God, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. So, Esther's one of my favorite books in the Bible. And it's not just that my son's girlfriend's name is Esther. Hello, Esther. But, it's one of the few books in the Bible named after a woman. And I really kind of got my bristles up. I was listening to a sort of think tank kind of preacher guy, and he was talking about how God never put women in a place of authority over men, and that's the way it needs to be. And I'm like, look at Esther. Look at Deborah. There's so many. If you look in the Apocrypha, look at Judith. Very, very, very powerful women. And if you're into sort of Marian theology, look at Mary. It's really an amazing book, and the idea of Esther's story and how Esther saves her people. It's amazing. So I love the book of Esther. That's why I had to put it in. So this sermon's going to be pretty much about Esther. So here we are, almost in October. Seems like September just flew by, but it's almost October. And I don't know if you felt it, but it's like scary season is here, just seems to be building. Ooh, and there are all sorts of scary stories going around and spooky things on the internet. And this all makes like instincts of like making us lock our doors, or maybe want to go hide and scream. The idea of monsters around every corner. And you might think I'm talking about Halloween, but I'm not. I'm talking about election season. As we come to the end of election season. Halloween is there. But as November approaches, we're starting to hear more and more rhetoric being advanced that is meant to cause anxiety, and anxiety about our economy, about our society, even the ability for us to care for our pets or go outside a door. This idea of fear-mongering is everywhere, that there are dangerous criminals around us everywhere. That our borderlands here are unsafe. You might say that we're all living in Scarcity. But the problem is when you live in Scarcity, it's a hard place to live and be in God's kingdom. Scarcity thrives on mistrust, on rumors, on want, on lack of security, and gaining access to power by having the upper hand. Scarcity is a very easy place to create. We don't have to go down to the spirit store that's just opened, that's been open since August over in the Bed Bath & Beyond store, or maybe a vacant Mervyn store. You just need to find a marginalized group or a majority community that feels like it's under assault, and then plant the ideas that we're losing something. Maybe we can stoke up fears and create situations where people stand out as different, and then you can make a big power move. Either will cause fear in a marginalized group, and even in that dominant group that's feeling marginalized. And often, people who are immigrants or refugees from war, as they're targeted, they begin to submit to oppression. And then gets worse, and you get things like exile or worse, being rounded up for genocide. Sounds very contemporary, but what I'm talking about is the world that Esther is living in. Esther is married to King Xerxes, the god king of Persia, and I'm literally talking about a god king. She is Jewish, and her people are a displaced remnant of the kingdom of Judah that was conquered and occupied by the Babylonians. And then, after the Babylonians conquered them, then the Babylonians were conquered by the Persians. So they're kind of a double displaced community. And because they were forcefully exiled, many of them have left that land and created new lives within the Persian Empire. And because many Jewish people are educated and they could read, many of them became advisors or important government officials. They were important in the Babylonian Empire. And think of Daniel, the story of Daniel with the lion's den. He was like an advisor to the king. And then in the Persian Empire, where Esther finds herself queen. And the reason she finds herself queen is because the king's previous wife, head wife, barged in on him, and he didn't like that. So he banished her and said, I want a new queen. And Esther was elevated. And even though this Jewish population was integrated into the empire, they were still marginalized. They maintained their identity, but because of the religion, and because the religion had many practices that separated them from society at large. So they were working within this Persian empire, but because they practiced their religion and having things like purity laws, keeping clean, dietary laws, practices of Sabbath, and most of all, devotion to only one God, this was a marker and an easy target to set them out. So when a king is God, and you have to really understand that, Xerxes is a god. Not like a god, he is a god. Then that becomes problematic, because when you have a situation where some trusted advisors to the king are Jewish, like Esther's uncle Mordecai, you have to think about people who become jealous and unethical, people seeking power, like Haman. And I'm used to saying his name is Haman, so I'm probably going to be going to that, but you can say either one, Haman or Haman. So, Haman will do anything to marginalize and disenfranchise Mordecai and the Jewish people. He will do anything to gain an edge, to have power over others. Lies and manipulations, playing up the differences between the displaced immigrants and the rest of society. And even though the Jewish people are doing relatively well in the Persian Empire, there's still a people who are living in exile and oppression. And so Haman decides to use the king's vanity to create a lie, where the Jewish people are exposed because of their religious practices. And these practices have been well known since Babylonian time, because they're known from the time of Daniel. He was persecuted under it. But Xerxes, King Xerxes, at the prompting of Haman, declares a national day of prayer. Maybe he had a prayer breakfast that day, I don't know. But he had a national day of prayer, which involved everyone bowing down to a statue of the king and acknowledging his godhood. Now the problem is when you have a multicultural empire like the Persians were, because they had conquered so many different areas, and you have to remember too that this area has been going back and forth between Babylonians and Assyrians and Persians, and then Greeks, and then the Romans are going to come in later. So it's a very, very diverse area. When you have a multicultural empire like that, it's relatively easy to add one more god to your pantheon if you're a person who's open to many gods. Bowing down to a statue of a god king is easy because his gods, that king, vanquished you and your God, and he's probably holding on to your God's stuff from the temple. And he did this with the Jewish temple. He took the lampstand and the table and the offering things. He took all of the things that were in the temple and he put them into his temple. And so he's like holding the God hostage. And for other religions, they would actually take the statue of the god hostage and they would lock it away like a prisoner. And this is because the god Xerxes has vanquished your God. And this is partially one reason why in the Judaic custom, they don't make images of God, because God cannot be taken or held hostage, because God lives in each and every one of us. It's the breath of God. It's the imago Dei, the living image of God. And as Christians, Jesus pointed that there is nothing, Easter morning proves this, there is nothing that will take us from the comfort and love of God that we see as followers of Jesus. This is pretty good news if you live in Scarcity. Haman creates scarcity knowing that by helping create unfair laws that require everyone to bow down and do offerings, he knows that anyone who disobeys will be killed. Now, he may have published a 900-tablet plan, but in the end, the rounding up and execution of the Jewish community, and more importantly, Mordecai, will be the end. In fact, Haman is so sure of his plan. He builds a scaffold. In the message, he says it's 75 feet tall, and he's prepared for Mordecai's execution. So high, no one can ignore it. Now, it really, really bothers me, this idea of, you think of the people, the Jewish people who have been exiled from the Babylonian Assyrians and now are living under the Persians. The idea of a people who have lived through violence and the stress of being exiled, finding a way to live despite being disenfranchised, are being targeted by liars who are spreading uncaring, ruthless lies about them. They are power seekers, bringing it to the point of violence and loss of life. Maybe a new exile for those who have the possibility of escape. It's bleak, and it's a double exploitation of people who are already suffering. And it's a terrible thing that Haman is doing. But Esther comes to the rescue. And she risks her status and her life when she reveals that she is Jewish and she comes from this community. And that Haman is threatening both her and her people. And Xerxes becomes outraged, not at Esther, but who would dare to do this to the people of his queen? And so by his oath and his love for Esther, the king reverses his decree. He can do it because he's a god. And then states that what Haman had planned for Mordecai, Haman's going to receive for himself. And so Haman gets hung on his own scaffold. It's a reminder, as Jesus put it, if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. Hate begets hate. And love is the only way. You know, when you go crafting elaborate gallows for other people, in God's way, you end up hanging yourself. So, As a sideline, Esther's story is celebrated in Purim, which is held in springtime. This next year it's going to be in March. And it's celebrated with costumes and storytelling and noisemakers, gifts, special treats. For those of you who've ever celebrated Purim, there's a delicious pastry called a hamantaschen, which are like little sort of jelly-filled little triangles. They're so good. And they represent Haman's tri-cornered hat. In addition to the festival, the Haman's hat is a later addition to the festival. Didn't come out of Persia. But this is a story of the destruction of Haman's scare city. And once scare city is overcome, people can live. They can live in joy. They can eat food like hamantaschen, like have pastries. They can dance. They can love. You might say there's an opportunity for abundance. Abundance. So you go from scarcity city to abundance. So Jesus tells, later on as we get into the gospel, Jesus tells his followers to just stop it. Stop it when they start questioning people's motives and if they're following God's ways and if it's the right way. They tell Jesus that people are doing something good, casting out demons in Jesus' name, but they're not part of the right group. They don't have authorization. Jesus reminds them that doing good is doing good. Authorized or not. You know, what the disciples are proposing about that they're not part of the group and that they need to be authorized is at worst, and I'm going to be provocative here, a generous misinterpretation and what we as human beings are prone to do using this type of thinking in which we condemn acts of love because they're not properly sanctioned or not done in the right way or not done by the right people. These are the roots of things like Christian nationalism. And Jesus stops that right away clearly to the point of saying, if you're going to do that, you might as well just cut off your hand, gouge out your eye. It's really gross kind of imagery. That's what Jesus said. If you're pushing people out, if you are breaking them, you might as well have a millstone around your neck and be thrown into a lake. Because that's what you're doing to them. You are being a millstone. You are impeding the kingdom of God. You are gouging out the eyes of Christ. You are cutting off the hands of Christ. And he talks about anyone who hurts these little ones. And sometimes that's incorporated into nice children's services and talking about, we need to care for our children. We need to love them and elevate them. And this is all true. But that's not the main message of this. People's faith is like nurturing children. It's a very, very precious and delicate thing. And as I say over and over, that quote that Jesus talks about to those who have been given much, much is expected. It's not about money. It's about trust. And each and every one of you, in some way, by my ordination or by your presence here, by my standing up here talking, you have given an element of trust to me. And that's a valuable thing. And if I do anything to break that, then I'm like a millstone. And I'm stopping your growth to God. So I pray that all of you are along with me, and I love talking about things too. So I'm not the voice of God, and I'm here to help you think. But we're all like that. We're not here to impede others who are trying to find their way and do good. So rather than saying these little ones, I would say children of faith. And if you hammer anyone's good works done in God's way, not in a selfish way, not an ulterior motive way, not Haman's way, but for Christians, for followers of Jesus, Jesus' way, it's all the same. Works of love. It doesn't require proper authorization by kings, by popes, by presidents, by preachers, by clergy, by churches, by me, by Michael, anyone. God's way is God's way. Justice is justice. To use an old word, righteousness is righteousness. We don't use that word very often because it gets tied up with self-righteousness. But righteousness is doing right, doing the right thing, making that choice. Sometimes I find righteousness as being more accessible than justice. Justice sounds so big. What can I do? But I can do the right thing. I can try to do the right thing. As I've been saying all summer long, and this is my swan song, so the last time you'll hear it for a while. I mean, you'll hear it from Michael, but you won't hear me saying, love is love is love is love is love is love is love. We come back to it over and over and over again. I want to end with a story about St. Francis, because St. Francis Day is coming. You may have heard me tell this story before, but it's my favorite story is about St. Francis. And his day is coming up on October 4th. And I'm doing animal blessings on October 12th. Bring your dog through, or cat, or tarantula, whatever you'd like. There's a story about St. Francis and a fear campaign that started against a misunderstood creature. So in Italy, there's a town called Gubbio. And in that, there was a wolf that roamed the countryside and stalked and killed the sheep and the livestock by night. And the people tried to go out and kill it. But there it remained in the darkness, and the animal thrived. And stories grew that this wolf was a huge threat to the security of the town. Stories flew that this wolf was seen eating geese from the lake. There's a story that even a sheepdog had been devoured by the wolf. What was next? House cats, pet dogs, coming into people's homes and taking their children. The town of Gubbio was panicked. It had turned into a scare city. And that wolf had to be destroyed at all costs. Now, it's funny that this fully grown adult wolf had been thriving in harmony with the town for years until recently. But St. Francis, who had a reputation with animals, came to Gubbio to offer his help with this wolf. So St. Francis came, and the wolf came out and stood defiantly, not sure what Francis would do. And so Francis, instead of grabbing a weapon or yelling, bowed down to the wolf and greeted the wolf, and then asked the wolf, because Francis would talk to animals, he greeted the wolf and asked, "Why are you killing livestock in the field?" And the wolf replied, "There's no food in the forest, and he's starving." The stories of his savagery and eating pets and threatening children were false. Francis made the situation right by taking time, honoring the wolf, and asking and listening to the wolf, and treating the wolf with kindness and love. The people of Gubbio then left their Scarcity when they saw Francis coming down the road with the wolf, peacefully at his side, licking his hand. Then the townsfolk of Gubbio embraced the wolf and took care of it. And they gave it food and petted and cared for it as long as it lived. And when the wolf died, they shed a tear when it passed away. St. Francis and the wolf of Gubbio are reminders that listening and kindness break the confines of Scarcity. Right now, as a moment of reflection, as we approach the height of this scary season, the season of election, and even as we approach Halloween, we'll hear and see many kinds of frightening things, and you may feel genuine fear. But remember, look behind the masks. Look behind the props and scary stories. Look behind sound effects and flashing lights. Because with God, there's no fear. And even though it seems like this season is endless and scary, full of scarcity, remember that God is with us. Remember that we have a banquet set before those who would create fear. We can eat, hug, dance, and look through those clouds of fear, even as they try to envelop us. On that feast table, I want you to pick up a bun and dance and see your opportunity for abundance. Amen.